How does that look?
Great.
Pretty good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for giving me the invitation to talk about the covers I collect and why I do it, really. And I'm doing it mostly because I'm very enthusiastic supporter of open philately, whereby you integrate whatever bit of philatelic material you have into the context of the environment that was going on at that time, who was sending the letters, why were they doing it, and all that kind of background information. I think that's the way, in many ways, at least one way, we bring philately really to life in all this. And so I'm going to be showing you a few covers this evening that I've been collecting for quite a while. I've got an echo on the line. Is it me? Okay. Um, and first of all, let me just say right up front, I do not do not speak Arabic. Sorry, I don't read Arabic either. But our Sudan study group Facebook group which has about nearly 500 members now, has a lot of people on there who speak Arabic. So I've been very grateful to them for helping me in translating some of the things I'm going to show you. It doesn't mean it's going to be correct, and if anybody hears or sees something which I've got wrong, I'd be very pleased to hear about it. Okay, so this is all about the very early times in philatelically speaking in Sudan. The first 20 years, sort of after the turn of the century, after the reoccupation of Sudan and the formation of the Anglo-Egyptian condominium. And of course, prior to that, there were a lot of Egyptian post offices all the way through the whole of Sudan. And many of them are indicated on this map in red dots. And quite a lot of the letters going to be showing you, the covers, come to or from some of these locations. So these are the traditional, in the northern part of what was Sudan then, where the Egyptian postal system had existed for a good long time, and it was just carried on once it became Sudan philately. Okay, so the first chunk I'm going to show you, as you might imagine, in the first 20 years of that century, there were a large number of military people in Sudan as a consequence of the reoccupation of the country after the Mahdist forces were driven out. And so there's a lot of correspondence going backwards and forwards. So I'm not really going to be talking about military correspondence. I'm just going to be talking about the people who were involved in sending these things, and just show you some of these sort of covers, the classic covers, the very first ones. Here's one. This one, for example, is one of the prepaid covers, very first one issued, and you can see what was going on in Sudan at that point. Was the Egyptian material was being overprinted in Cairo with Sudan in Arabic and in French, and that was the first generation of stamps for the country. But very strong links back and forth between the two countries at this point in time. And this is a letter addressed to Colonel Sloggett. There's quite a lot of correspondence around for Sloggett to be found. This is going from Halfa. Sits right on the border between Sudan and Egypt, Wadi Halfa, and was one of two locations in the country that survived during the Mahdist forces takeover, that remained under control of the Anglo-Egyptian forces. And so postal correspondence continued all through the 10 years when the country was otherwise under Mahdist control. And this is a letter going to a guy called Colonel Sloggett. Colonel Sloggett was part of the whole reoccupation campaign. He was a senior medical officer. And as I say, there's quite a lot of correspondence you can find going back and forth him. He was there right through the whole of the reoccupation time, and right down to the major battle down in Cairo Omdurman area, where he got very seriously wounded, shot in the chest. He survived, though, and went on to be the honorary surgeon to the King of England. I don't think that's a real role. I don't think you actually do anything except take the title. The back of the cover, you can see the cancellation. So the front shows you, in this case, that started from Halfa, on 19th of 11, 1897. It arrived in Alexandria. There's the arrival council, and above it you can see it entering into the military post system of in Alexandria, where it found its way through to Colonel Sloggett. So a range of different types of cancellation marks there, allowing you to trace the journey of this particular cover. Here's another military one. This is addressed to Colonel Robb, back actually in Britain, but this traveled quite a long way at the time and took quite a while to do the journey because it was coming from right down in the bottom right-hand corner, Kassala on the border of Eritrea. And it had to go up a long journey from where it started, up to Suakin, and from Suakin up to Wadi Halfa, and then from Wadi Halfa up through Egypt to finally heading out across to Britain. Now, Rob himself had been involved in the military forces in there. He was part of military intelligence, and this address here, the second line of the address, which says AA9, is secret code. Well, I suppose it's not secret, but it's code for military intelligence office in the War Office. So he was trying to gather information about that, and no doubt this was a letter which carried that. Its council is quite interesting because the council is the only council that Sudan has where the date is actually in Arabic. All other councils and every other council that followed thereafter, the date is primarily in English or French in some cases. But this is the only Arabic example I know of, and is for a council from there. Again, the same kind of prepaid postage with the Sudan overprint there on its way up. You can see the Suakin Council on the top right. I'll come back and talk a little bit about Suakin later on because I think it's a really interesting place because, as I say, it's one of the two places that survived through the whole 10 years of the Mahdist occupation where it maintained a postal system. Okay, here's another character, Herbert William Jackson, who spent his entire working life and his life after retirement in Sudan. He really settled down there and played a major role in the country, redeveloping the country. This is just a 2 mil prepaid, normally used for printed matter or commercial stuff. I'm not sure what it would have contained. Maybe just a note to him, an official transaction or something. He was there for a long time in Sudan, fought right through, including the failed initial Gordon Relief Campaign, 1885, and then he came back again and continued afterwards. And at the peak of his career, he was appointed Inspector General of Sudan, and with the rank of Elua, and you can see that on this his title there. These kind of titles were commonly used for all the military people. He played a very strong link, as I say. He retired in 1923, and he actually settled down in Sudan and played a role in the redeveloping of the city of Marawi, where he then set up home, basically. The story says that he had home with a succession of different partners, one of whom gave birth, it says, to a famous Sudanese footballer. Now, I've never been able to find out who this famous Sudanese footballer is, but I'd be curious to know if anybody can identify that. He died in 1930, and they actually constructed a small pyramid in his honor with his name on it. I've not been able to find any evidence online of whether this pyramid still exists, but if anybody has any pictures of it, I'd really like to see what it looked like. So he kind of devoted his entire life to Sudan. Again, on the back here. So this is it's going from Cairo down to Dongola on the Nile there, where he was based at that time. And you can see a TPO council on the back, typical of the stuff going up and down the Nile. Here's another gentleman, Captain George Starling Rennie. Really, he didn't do anything exceptional, except he just devoted his life to working in Sudan. He was initially there in the British Army, and Stafford. This is you can see from this cover addressed to him in the South Staffordshire Regiment. The location of the address where it's going to was a big military site, Gibbet, I think if that's how you pronounce it. Big military hospital, and later on in World War II, it also played a big role as a prisoner of war camps and things like that. So it was always a big focus. It was because access from there to the coast to Swarking was possible. It was a very convenient place. Now he spent his life in Sudan. He's got seconded from the British Army into the Sudan Defence Force. And here's a picture supposedly of him, the only picture I can find of him, with a few of the examples of Sudan Defence Force. Sudan Defence Force, as far as I can understand it, was some crossover between a military and a police kind of organization, because it continued after the war. He remained a major player in that. Incidentally, his picture came from the National Army Museum in Chelsea and London. If you haven't been there, it's quite an interesting place to visit. A lot of good stuff there. But all his papers are held there in the National Army Museum in Chelsea. And so it was very interesting going through and reading it all about it. A lot of his notes about his life there and things really brought him to life for me. And I have a lot of coverage of this guy. He was a prolific writer, back and forth to home. And so I have about 50 covers of his. Unfortunately, I only have about 5 or 6 actual letters that were in there, and I'd like a lot more. But the covers alone are quite interesting. Now, here's a very well-known figure, Major General Rudolf Baron von Slatin. He was actually Austrian by birth, but he chose to put himself up and became a member of the British forces. Essentially, there he helped to try and prevent, at the time of the overpowering of the loss of Sudan to the Mahdi's forces, he was captured. And he was held prisoner for no less than 12 years by the Mahdi's forces, and he just managed to escape about the time that Kitchener was coming back in to make the reconquest. So he rejoined and played a major role. This is just a newspaper wrapper that was going to him, again, pre-printed item. You can see a nice cancellation on it, which has the Council of Cairo, but it also has the outgoing mail symbol underneath it, Sadir, which was used just for a while to indicate mail going from major post offices. Again, not sure what was in this newspaper wrapper. They're not very common to find, because I imagine most of them got very quickly thrown into the bin when they arrived, if they're wrapped around newspapers or something. Anyway, this is the introduction. This is von Slatin. As I say, look at all the wonderful medals he's got all over him. He's clearly a major player and he spent every summer visiting Europe, visiting different royalty in Europe. He was really hobnobbing with everybody he could. And we have this second cover, also a Slatin cover. This is slightly different than the previous one, because it's actually from him. In the bottom left-hand corner of this, you can see his signature, Slatin. It has no stamp on it. It's addressed to this lady, Madame de Vilmorin. Now, Madame de Vilmorin was again a high-flying European figure. She traveled around Europe a lot. Her husband was a major industrialist, and she clearly had visited Sudan at some point. And I think what happened is this. I can disentangle what's going on here. A lot of cancellations and marks all over the reverse there. You can see, and I think what he was doing is it goes all the way from Khartoum all the way up to Alexandria, and then bounces all the way back again to Khartoum. And you can see various things written on it, like on the back, unknown. Someone's written unknown, and clearly someone added Khartoum at some point on the front, because it's got underneath here the French, Le Pays, what country or what place. So it obviously went back. So I think it was somehow or other a letter from him to her, chasing her as she left Sudan and headed back up through Egypt and possibly somewhere else. So it went all the way trying to track them down and failing. It obviously at some point somebody added a tax cancellation mark in the top right-hand corner, but then somebody else seems to have crossed it out. I don't know quite what's going on here. Maybe because he was such an important figure, he felt he didn't need to put any stamps on. I almost think he gave this letter perhaps to one of his assistants, and said, please take this letter to this lady. And when the assistant discovered that she'd left Khartoum, he took on his own initiative to try and catch up with her, but it never quite made it in the end. So as a result, you see these plethora of cancellations across the back here, tracking it up and down from Khartoum up to Alexandria 5 days later. And then it tracks back down through the standard TPO from Beni Suef to Cairo and back down to Khartoum again, where it finally ended its journey. Again, I don't have the contents of this, but it might have been an interesting letter to read, because clearly these were two very colourful figures of their time. I should have mentioned that the lady, Madame de Villeron, was also very popular with the Spanish nobility, to the extent that she actually at one point bore a son to the King of Spain. I don't think this son ever became into the role of taking over the country, but she clearly was someone who was well known on the European stage. So it's quite an interesting cover from that point of view. And here's another one, has a lot of history somehow tied up in it that I have been trying to disentangle. The first thing you might notice is the mixed franking. It's got a mixture of Sudanese stamps, Sudanese prepaid postage in the top right-hand corner. Then it has 2 Egyptian stamps added to it. And all the cancellations in Cairo are all of the same date. Now, we know that was addressed to Sir Evelyn Wood, who was basically in charge of the war office and the war effort in Sudan. And this letter is believed to have come from Douglas Haig, who at that time was a junior captain, and he was sent by Evelyn Wood to report back on what was going on in Sudan, because Evelyn Wood wasn't convinced that Kitchener was actually doing a good job. And so he sent this guy down there. Now, this letter, we know, written on the 7th of September from Omdurman, shortly after the reconquest a few days earlier. And we know that because Haig's diaries are in the Scottish Archive. And so you can go and read his actual diary. And on this day, on 7th of September, he said he wrote a letter back to Sir Evelyn Wood telling him all about what was going on. Haig was not hugely happy being in Sudan. He didn't get on with Hitler at all. In fact, sent a lot of very critical remarks confidentially back to Sir Evelyn Wood. And the only question that's left is the puzzle as to why it ended up being posted from Cairo, when at that time, clearly the author, Douglas Haig, was still down in Omdurman. And my guess here, and it's only a guess, but it's an entertaining guess, is that he had a mate, and his mate was Churchill. And Churchill was there with him also as a Churchill at the time was a reporter, reporting back to the newspapers in England. And Winston Churchill left Cairo on the 9th of September, which is 2 days after that Haig wrote this. So I think he actually carried the letter back to Cairo because at that time the postal system hadn't quite got re-established. It's only a few days after the conquest. And so I think he thought it was safest to give this letter to Churchill, and Churchill carried it back up and got to Cairo. Who put the stamps on and where, I'm not sure why anybody thought this mixture of stamps was appropriate, but it's like they're covering all bases. They've got a bit of Sudanese there, a bit of Cairo there. Any other explanations, well, I'd very much be grateful to hear it. But it's an interesting mixture of all these things involving some key players in Sudan at that time. Let me just talk a little bit about Suakin, because I've got a few covers from there. Suakin, as I said, is the other place that survived the Mahdist revolution. It was maintained, it was occupied by a variety of British and Egyptian and British Empire forces for those 10 or 12 years while it was under siege. So there's a fair bit of correspondence going backwards and forwards between Suakin and not only to Britain, but other parts of the British Empire, like India. There were lots of Indian forces there and things like that. Suakin, unfortunately, is now a pretty desolate place, an abandoned place. At that time, the turn of that previous century, it was a major port and had been for hundreds of years. It was where many the people in that country, and Egyptians as well would go across to get to Mecca and places like that. And on the face of it, it looks like a great harbor defend, but it's actually very shallow water. And eventually, after about 1905, they started to build Port Sudan, and so it rapidly went into decline. And the picture in the lower left is more of an image of what it is like these days. Um, it was under siege, as I said, for about 12 years. This map, like, appeared in the Illustrated London News in 1884, an attempt to try and keep the British informed of what was going on. It shows a whole variety of British naval forces in the harbour, all adding to their defence. A lot of earthworks, castles, and things had been built around the edge of the town to try to defend it all. And this is an interesting mixture of things. The one that catches my attention most and leaves me puzzled is right in the middle there is something called, identified as the Italian torpedo ship. Quite why there was an Italian ship there at all, I don't understand, because there was a lot of tension and on and off between Britain and Italy on that whole side of Africa. And why it was a torpedo ship, I don't know. But there it is, quite clearly marked in the Illustrated London News. So I guess it must be true. So here's a cover addressed to someone called Captain Gordon. Now, Gordon, of course, is a key name in the whole play of all this. And Gordon of Khartoum was, of course, eventually killed in 1885 in Khartoum. So this looks like it's going at first glance to a close relative of Captain Gordon. You notice in the top right-hand corner, so this is coming from Britain, going through Brindisi, out to Suakin, and you can see the cancellation clearly there of Huntly. Now, Huntly is a place in Scotland, a castle, and it's actually the family home of the Gordon clan. So clearly this was coming from someone back home, addressed to this particular guy. And this guy his full name was known as Cosmo George Gordon, and he was in the Royal Marines. He wasn't actually a very close connection at all to Gordon of Khartoum, but he was clearly in the same family. It's a morning cover, as you can see as well. There's quite a few of these around, all look like morning covers as well. So it's not clear to me. I haven't been able to find out why they were being sent out like this. So no, not a close relative at all to Gordon in Khartoum. And a few months after this letter arrived, but he was part of the Royal Marines, so regiments were coming in and going out all the time as part of the defence of Suakin. So the Royal Marines were there in Suakin for about 2 years early on in the defence, before then moving on to India. And as I say, this was quite common. There were a lot of units going back and forth. Let me just mention another Gordon, just as a footnote here. I don't actually have any covers from this guy, but this is someone else called Gordon. This is Captain William Gordon. For some reason, he was known as Monkey Gordon. I can only assume, I haven't found a picture of him, but I'm guessing maybe that's what he looks like. I don't know. Sort of name that he probably picked up at school that stuck with him. But he played a major role. He was a close relative of Gordon of Khartoum, a cousin, and he played a major role in the reconquest of the country by leading this naval force up the Nile. And that's a whole nother saga in itself, a whole nother story. There are books have been written on this. All these military boats were taken out to Sudan in parts and assembled south of the cataracts so they could be used in the military forces. And he led a small fleet of gunships known as Monkey Gordon's Greyhounds up the Nile to help defeat. And these were a major military force, which was hard for the Mahdists to compete against, because they were heavily armed, significant products. So that's so there are several Gordons floating around in the whole story of Sudan. And here's someone else called Sinclair, John Sinclair. And I'm showing you this because, again, he's another one of these people who came into Suakin for a while. He was in the Lancers, helped play a role in defences. And a lot of these people returned back to Britain to take on a political career afterwards, having done their military service of one kind or another. This particular gentleman went on to become, after he left Suakin back to Britain, as I say, became a politician, and he became Secretary for Scotland. And then towards the end of his career, he was made governor of Madras. And by all accounts, he was quite a popular governor there. Supported a lot of the local cultures. And there's a big memorial to him in the church in Madras. So this is John Sinclair, Secretary for Scotland, who was there for a while. Now, this one's slightly different. This is also from Suakin, but this is addressed just to a random lady in Wokingham. You can see the cancellation there. So 2.5 pence, old pence, was the standard postal charge for military personnel to send letters home. And the cancellation on there actually has the coding, the letter C above. You got Egypt at the bottom of the cancel, and then the year 85. And then above it, there's a letter C, which you might just be able to make out. That was the code for the post office in Suakin, the British Army post office, only operated for a few months. In these few months, the Australians arrived. Now, this was a big adventure for Australia. Australia had never actually sent out a military force anywhere in the world. This is the first time they participated in military action abroad. And this picture here shows the ship leaving Sydney with all a huge amount of attention. Why am I showing you this? Well, it turns out that this letter addressed to Mrs. Barnett. Mrs. Barnett was actually born in New South Wales in Australia, which is where this whole military force was coming from, and was the sister of one of the military people on board the ship. So I think what happened was when they got to Suakin, and they were only there for 3 months or so, I think he took the opportunity to write a letter to his sister back in, who by then had emigrated and was living in England. We know it's not from anybody close to her, like her husband. Her husband was a banker and worked all the time in Wokingham. So clearly it's not from that. So I'm guessing that this is definitely from her brother who was aboard that ship. And the military forces, the Australian military forces, left after a few months and returned back to Australia with a lot of fanfare. And here's one involving the Indian forces. So the Indian forces also, Indian regiments were brought in to help defend Suakin, and on a cyclic basis. This is an interesting postcard going from Suakin to Bombay. It's a standard piece of Egyptian prepaid postcard. As you can see, it doesn't have Sudan on it or anything. So this is at a time before those prepaid postage came into existence. You can see some of it I can make out. The bottom line obviously says it's got a name of somebody in Bombay. In the top left-hand corner, you can see a cancellation which says C Post Office. Now, this was, so what happened with this is it left Suakin, went up the coast to Suez, where it got put onto the service being run by the P&O, the Postal Service. So their job, the P&O had a contract to get mail out to India from Britain, and it went through the Suez down to Aden and then across to around to Bombay. So this postcard, which was obviously going back to somebody in India from somebody in Suakin, picked up, went by that route and ended up in Bombay. What I don't know, and I've not been able to find anyone to help me with this, is what on earth it says, because it's written in a script that I am told no longer exists, was ceased to be used about more than 50 years ago in India. I've had various suggestions that it's possibly the Marathi language and a Modi script or something like that. I don't know. And so I'm putting it up there in case any of you have any insights into Indian languages or know anybody. I've tried lots of people in different university departments to see if they can help, and I've got nowhere with this. It's probably very boring. It probably says, having a tough time, natives aren't very friendly, food is terrible, but it would be really fun to know exactly what was written there. I just love it. The script is fantastic. There appears to be no mistakes, crossings out, just a very interesting style of writing indeed. But if anybody can help me with that, that would be great. Okay, what about non-military posts now? So here are several covers. Now, these are going to be written in Arabic. And so I'm relying very heavily on my friends and colleagues on the Sudan Facebook group to help me translate these covers, because I do like to know who they were going to and if anything else about them that was possible. This one is addressed from Khartoum. You can see from the cancellation there, to Cairo. And I'm told it's addressed to the clerk of some government department in Cairo, but I haven't been able to get any further clarity than that. So if anybody can help me with that, that would be great. On the back, there's a standard TPO cancellation showing the route it was going. So it left Khartoum in 1901, arrived in Cairo about a week later. Funnily enough, it came with this very strange letter inside. And I've shown this to quite a few Arabic readers. They can kind of make sense of it, but they all come back and say this is basically nonsense. And I don't know what's going on here either. So I'm giving you a lot of puzzles here that I'd really like help with. This particular one has this military style logo in the top left-hand corner, which looks like it should be some regimental badge or something like that. Again, all my searches on Google and on the internet have failed to come up with any identification. It says the 33rd RADNA, no idea what that is. And for the people who can read Arabic, I understand this reads like a lot of nonsense. So it's almost like I have no idea why this was inside the letter when I bought it. I thought at first it was going to be really interesting and exciting. I've still no idea what on earth it was doing, and why anybody bothered to spend all their time creating this. It leaves me baffled. So another puzzle out there for plea for help. And here's one to an individual in Cairo from Berber. Berber was a little bit further, still north of Cairo, of Khartoum on the Nile, and it's addressed to somebody called Eduardo Sceri, and in a suburb of Cairo. Now, I struggled to find anything about this particular person. I wanted to know why he was being sent, who he was, and I just got lucky in the end by coming across somebody in the University of California who was also called Scary. So basically, I was Googling this surname, and I came across this gentleman, Eric Scary, who works in the University of California, and he was quite amused to see this cover when I sent it to him, because he is a great nephew of Eduardo. Now, Eduardo was one of these. It sounds like he's Italian, but actually he's Maltese, or he was Maltese in origin. And while the Suez Canal was under construction, and sometime afterwards, a large number of Maltese Italian emigres came and set up shop in Egypt and became part of the Egyptian infrastructure. And he was one of these people. He was a dealer in cotton. Of course, cotton was a major industry of Sudan. And so he was probably involved somehow in exporting cotton, maybe to the rest of the world. On the back, there are a couple of TPO cancels you can see in the lower right-hand corner, showing you where they've gone to and how they arrived eventually at this destination, Kafia El Zayat. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but a nice clear cancel there for when it arrived. That was the address that it was going to. Unfortunately, most of these Maltese/Italians left the country, left Egypt about 1956 at the time of the Suez Crisis, and most of them returned back home to re-establish their business back in Malta, and including the Scary family as well. So it's a nice little glimpse into part of the community that was involved in Egypt at that time. Here's a nice cover. Oh, okay. I spoke to you very briefly 6 months ago about talismanic covers because I like those. I'm intrigued. Now this is let me just that blue thing there is the numbers 8642. This is the talismanic numbers that are supposed to help your mail get to the destination more successfully by having some special powers to enhance the chance of success. And here's one exactly like that. I'm not sure who it's addressed to. I don't think I ever found out. Oh, I've got written on the bottom, addressed possibly to the clerk responsible for some, I don't know, I was told gas or electricity company. But this is 1900, so I'm not sure what on earth was going on here, and what role that would have been playing for a place Berber way down in the Nile. There's a lot of interesting background to this. I'm still trying to find out. So that's your talismanic numbers down there. Just to remind you, talismanic numbers came from this magic square, whereby whichever direction you look at the square, whichever way you count up the numbers diagonally, horizontally, or vertically, they always come to a total of 15. And so this was known as a kind of magic square of 15. And it was thought that if you put the numbers, you had to put the numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8 in the corners, and then it all worked out. And so 2, 4, 6, 8 was seen as these special numbers that had this special power. And one of the origins claimed for this is a Muslim religious philosophical writer way back in the 11th or 12th century who noted this. They were very much into mathematics at that time and noted this. And so true Muslims often have put these numbers on cover. Here's another one. Again, you can see the talismanic numbers there. Now, this one's addressed to, I'm told it's addressed to the Minister for War in Cairo. Interesting cancel in the top left hand from Khartoum. This is the very first cancellation that Sudan had. You can see the initials SPS, which only appeared right at the beginning, which stands for Sudan Postal System. It was only used briefly for a while, just a few months after the post office finally reopened in Khartoum. I am told that the address, Minister for War, is actually written in Turkish or even Old Turkish. And I guess if that's correct, then this is a hangover from the Ottoman Empire. And of course, they still had a significant influence around 1900 in that whole part of the world, even though the Ottoman Empire was pretty much coming to an end by then. And it was apparently addressed to the Minister of War at that time. I'm also told you're not supposed to mention their name when you're addressing them because everybody's supposed to know who the Minister for War is, I guess. Interesting registration cancellation cachet there. It's actually an Egyptian one. Again, they were still using Egyptian for registration cachets for the first year because they hadn't got round to producing the Sudan ones, which came immediately afterwards. So this is almost one of the very first the last times that this Egyptian registration mark appears. So you've got a combination in the top left-hand corner of the very first Sudanese cancellation and the very last use of an Egyptian registration mark. So I just wanted to show you, I got this just very recently, a few weeks ago. This is an unsuccessful talismanic letter. So the talismanic numbers weren't always completely magic and didn't always get you the answer you wanted. You can see that in the middle there quite clearly it has a talismanic number. It was addressed to somebody, I don't know who they are in any particular way, but whoever they were, the letter did not find them. And so you've got a series of interesting extra cachets appearing on this thing, apart from, so it was sent from Halfaya, which is sort of North Khartoum, to this town in Upper Egypt. And you can see various cancellations, remarks there, including destination cancellation there. And then on the back, you see this unclaimed sticker written in French, Arabic, and English, indicating that they've been unable to find or know the recipient of the letter. And then finally, you end up on the front with this cancellation, which in French, Bureau de Revue. I think that's the dead letter office, I think is the best translation I can find of it. This is quite a few months later, it finally ended up there. And reading about this idea of this dead letter location in Egypt, it said that all the mail, once it was no longer deliverable, was supposed to be destroyed. Obviously, this cover was not destroyed and somehow got out into the collector's market somehow or other. So an interesting mixture of extra features of an unsuccessful talismanic letter. So don't go writing your 8642 on your British letters because it probably doesn't always work. This guy here, this is again coming from it's a bit later now, coming from Sudan, from Omdurman. I just included this because he was quite a well-known figure in the Sunni fundamentalist world. He was originally from Syria, and he moved to Egypt and worked in Cairo for a while, writing letters and documents. He was a big creator of documents supporting the Sunni fundamentalist faith. This particular letter is again only 2 milliamps, so it was supposed to just contain printed matter, but I don't know what it would have contained. After World War One, he returned to Syria for a while, but eventually came back and spent the rest of his life back in Egypt, in Cairo. Well known for writing lots of very strongly worded documents, shall I say, about supporting the Sunni faith and the anti-Shiite faith. So quite a big political, religious figure of the time. Okay, finally, I just want to finish with a couple of stamp dealers. Stamp dealers were everywhere. Selling stamps to tourists was a big industry, and clearly part of the reason why there are so many forged early Sudanese stamps on the market is because of this tourist market was enormous. And if people didn't have the Egyptian stamps overprinted with the Sudanese overprint, then people were just doing it left, right, and center. This isn't anything to do with forgery, this one. It's a letter written in Greek, so I had to call upon one of my Greek colleagues in order to translate it for me. It's basically a letter from somebody to this very well-known stamp dealer, Angelou in Cairo, saying, look, I've got these interesting stamps. Would you be interested in buying them? Now, the strange thing is about this, and then he drew a little sketch on the postcard. You can see a little sketch of two army service overprinted stamps, which he's claiming that he's got to sell. And this is what the official army service stamp looked like, the real ones that existed. So I think you can see that it's got the numbers in the corner and army service. So you can see this is probably a sketch of something like that. What is very unusual or very hard to understand is the values that he put on here. On the left-hand one, he says he's got number 10. So there was a 10 piastre version of this. It's extremely rare, and I certainly don't have any in my collection. They typically go for hundreds of pounds if you can find one. The one next to it has 20 on it, and there never was, or there is no record of there being a 20 piastre army service stamp. Did he really have one, or was he just making it all up? I don't know. It's intriguing to think that there might have been for a while. There's no record of it anywhere, of ever anybody. De La Rue produced these stamps, no record of producing 20 piastre ones. So quite what he was up to, I don't know. Anyway, so this was him trying to solicit a bit of business by sending it to a well-known stamp dealer in Cairo from Khartoum. And this is the other one I just want to show you. Many of you may know about Naaman covers. This is all part of the meeting the demand of the tourist industry. And you met, in this case, this guy, Victor Naaman, met the demands of the tourist industry by actually producing things himself because he couldn't get his hands on enough covers. And so this is classic of the Naaman covers. It looks like at the top, it's going from a legitimate military person, Private James Orton, who's involved in the Suez Reconquest campaign. So it's a time where a lot of people like to collect covers from that. There's some scribble in the bottom right-hand corner, which says no stamp applied, field service, no stamps available, obtainable. And then the initials FCE appear there. And on the left-hand side, bottom left-hand side, you can see a genuine Egyptian postage due stamp. In fact, it's the example where the 2 milliams have been overprinted with 3 milliams in this sort of diagonal overprint. And again, there's an Alexandria, what appears to be and Alexandria, a rival cancellation stuck on top of it. So this looks like a really interesting cover. Lots of interesting features to it. At the time where a lot of collectors like to collect mail, but it's all a complete forgery, the whole thing. Let me just take you through why it's a forgery. First of all, this guy, Private Orton, never existed. You can easily check that because it even goes so far as to giving you the number of Private Orton being 1067, and so you can look him up, and there is no such person. The Darmali cancellation looks lovely, but is a totally forged cancellation, well-known forged cancellation. The Alexandria cancel is also a forgery. So again, looks really nice, but totally made up. And the stamp, though, is real. That's about the only thing that's real on this entire cover is the actual postage due stamp. And in the bottom right-hand corner, where it was written that there was no postage stamps available, whatever it said, the word field has been misspelt. And this is a characteristic of many of the Naaman covers. He didn't know how to spell field, and he spelt it the wrong way around, F-E-I-L-D instead of F-I-E-L-D. And so this is written, or something like this is written on lots of the covers, and they're easily identifiable if you see that misprint. Quite who FCE is, this initials here, I don't know. This little symbol just to the below in the bottom right hand corner, I think is the initials VN for Victor Naaman. So I think he was just adding his own little logo on there. Stamp dealers often did this, particularly at this time. They would put their own little badge on somewhere to apparently indicate authenticity, but this was a complete and utter forgery, the whole thing. And there are quite a few of them around. You often see them for sale, and people like to collect them. And I've got one because I wanted one in my collection. Who was this Victor Naaman? Well, he ran this philatelic business in Cairo in the house of his brother called Maurice. Now, Maurice Naaman was a totally bona fide, a very successful dealer of ancient Egyptian artifacts. And a huge chunk of the major museums of the world, including the British Museum, have items that they bought from Maurice Naaman. What Maurice thought of his brother Victor on the other side and somewhere else in the house, churning out covers to meet political demand of tourists, I can't imagine he approved too strongly. But clearly it was he had his own thriving business. But this is a picture taken from the inside of his showroom, of Maurice Naaman's showroom, showing all the sort of items you could go around and purchase for your museums back in wherever you were, wherever you came from around the world. So this is an interesting partnership of brothers involved in different ways in the tourist industry and things of Egypt. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed your journey. I've got lots of questions there. Anybody can help me with any of those things I've shown you along the way, I'd really love to hear from you. So there we go. I shall stop sharing now.